Grandma's will, my siblings got $3 million each. I got a rusty key. The worthless grandchild gets worthless junk, my sister laughed, burning my photos. Brother added, finally someone's being honest about her value. Dad agreed, some people don't deserve real inheritance. Uncle smirked, Grandma obviously knew who mattered. Aunt nodded, finally the family trash gets what she deserves. Cousin laughed, a rusty key for a rusty person. I stayed quiet at the funeral. Because I knew what the key opened, they just signed away their rights too. I'm Sarah, and this is the story of how my family learned that sometimes the most worthless-looking gift can be worth more than they could ever imagine. The day of Grandma Eleanor's funeral was supposed to be about mourning, but for my family, it became a celebration of greed disguised as grief. I sat in the back row of the funeral home, watching my relatives perform their Oscar-worthy displays of sorrow while secretly calculating their inheritance shares. My sister Jessica dabbed her eyes with a tissue that had never actually touched a tear. Oh, Grandma Eleanor, we'll miss you so much, she wailed dramatically, then immediately whispered to our brother Michael, do you think the lawyer will read the will today? Michael straightened his expensive tie and glanced around the room. I heard from Dad that we're each getting around $3 million. Can you believe it? I'm finally going to buy that lake house I've been wanting. My stomach churned. While they discussed their windfall, I was genuinely mourning the only person in our family who had ever truly loved me unconditionally. Grandma Eleanor had been my refuge during the storms of family dysfunction, the one person who saw value in me when everyone else saw disappointment. After the service, we gathered at Grandma's house for the will reading. The mahogany dining room that had hosted so many family dinners now felt like a courtroom. Attorney Robert Mitchell, a distinguished man in his 60s who had been Grandma's lawyer for over 30 years, spread the documents across the polished table. Before we begin, Mr. Mitchell said, adjusting his glasses, I want you to know that Eleanor spent considerable time crafting this will. Every decision was deliberate and well considered. My father, David, leaned forward eagerly. As the eldest child, he'd always assumed he'd receive the largest portion of the estate. My Uncle Tom sat beside him, equally expectant, while my Aunt Linda clutched her purse as if the inheritance might fly away. The bulk of Eleanor's liquid assets, Mr. Mitchell began, totaling approximately $12 million, will be divided equally among 4 of her grandchildren, Jessica, Michael, Amy, and Daniel. My cousins Amy and Daniel high-fived discreetly. Jessica squeezed Michael's hand. $3 million each. It was more money than any of us had ever dreamed of having. However, Mr. Mitchell continued, and the room fell silent, there are specific conditions attached to these inheritances. That's when he pulled out a separate envelope, yellowed with age and sealed with red wax. This contains additional instructions for Sarah. Every eye in the room turned to me. I felt like a specimen under a microscope, their gazes mixing curiosity with barely concealed disdain. Mr. Mitchell opened the envelope carefully and withdrew a small, rusty key attached to a thin chain. The metal was corroded, stained with age, and looked like something you might find in a junkyard. To my granddaughter Sarah, he read from Grandma's letter, I leave this key and the love that has always been in my heart for you. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Jessica started laughing. Not a gentle chuckle, but a cruel, mocking sound that filled the room. A rusty key? She gasped between laughs. The worthless grandchild gets worthless junk. She reached across the table and grabbed the framed photo of Grandma and me from last Christmas, where we were baking cookies together. Before I could stop her, she held it over the candle that had been burning on the table in Grandma's memory. This is perfect, Jessica said, watching the edges of the photograph curl and blacken. Finally, someone gets what they actually deserve. Michael nodded approvingly. Finally someone's being honest about her value. Sarah, you've always been the family disappointment. At least now it's official. The photo crumbled to ash in Jessica's fingers, and with it, one of my most treasured memories seemed to disintegrate too. Dad, who had been quiet until now, finally spoke up. I have to agree with your siblings, Sarah. Some people don't deserve real inheritance. Your grandmother was always too soft on you. Uncle Tom smirked from across the table. Grandma obviously knew who mattered in this family. A rusty key for the family failure? Sounds about right. Aunt Linda, never one to be left out of family cruelty, nodded vigorously. Finally the family trash gets what she deserves. We've all been thinking it for years. My cousin Amy, barely able to contain her glee over her $3 million windfall, pointed at the key in my hands and laughed. A rusty key for a rusty person. That's hilarious. Daniel joined in the laughter. What's it even for? Some old storage unit full of Grandma's moth-eaten clothes? I sat there, absorbing their cruelty like a sponge, feeling smaller with each word. But I didn't respond. I couldn't, because unlike them, I knew exactly what this key opened. And I knew that by accepting their inheritances, they had just signed away their rights to something far more valuable than money. The attacks continued for another 20 minutes. They passed the key around, examining it like a curiosity, making jokes about what worthless thing it might unlock. Mr. Mitchell looked increasingly uncomfortable, But the will had been read, the distributions were clear, and his job was essentially done. Well, Jessica said finally, wiping tears of laughter from her eyes, I guess we should start planning how to spend our real inheritances. Sarah, you can keep your little treasure there. Maybe you can hang it around your neck as a reminder of your place in this family. That night, after everyone had left to celebrate their windfalls, I drove to the outskirts of town. My hands shook as I pulled into the parking lot of Riverside Storage Facility, a place I visited with Grandma Eleanor many times over the years, though she'd always made me wait in the car. Someday, sweetie, she used to tell me, you'll understand why this place is so important. I walked to Unit 247, the key clutched tightly in my palm. The lock was old and stubborn, but after some gentle coaxing, it turned. The metal door rolled up with a rusty groan, and I stepped inside. What I found took my breath away. The storage unit was immaculate, climate-controlled, and filled with treasures that made my family's inheritance look like pocket change. Original paintings lined the walls, and not just any paintings. I recognized a genuine Van Gogh sketch, a small Picasso, and what appeared to be an original Monet water lily study. But that was just the beginning. Carefully preserved documents filled several filing cabinets. As I rifled through them, I discovered stock certificates, property deeds, and investment records that painted a picture of my grandmother's true wealth. The $12 million that had been divided among my siblings and cousins was just the tip of the iceberg. Eleanor had been far wealthier than anyone knew. The storage unit contained evidence of an art collection worth at least $50 million, stock portfolios valued at another $30 million, and property deeds to 6 commercial buildings in the city center that generated over $2 million in annual rental income. But there was more. So much more. I found a leather journal in Grandma's handwriting, dated just 3 months before her death. As I read, I understood the true scope of her plan. Sarah is the only one who visits me because she loves me, not because she wants something, she had written. The others call when they need money, show up when they want favors, and spend family gatherings calculating their future inheritance. Jessica borrowed $50,000 last year for her wedding and never paid it back. Michael hasn't called me in 8 months unless he needed something. The others are no better. I've decided to leave them enough to reveal their true nature. $3 million each should do it. Enough to make them comfortable, but not enough to change their fundamental character. Sarah, my dear granddaughter, will inherit the real wealth, not just the money, but the responsibility that comes with it. Further reading revealed that Grandma had spent the last 5 years of her life secretly transferring her most valuable assets into a trust, with me as the sole beneficiary. The rusty key wasn't just symbolic, it was literally the key to a fortune worth over $100 million. But Grandma's final twist was the most brilliant part of her plan. According to the legal documents I found, my siblings and cousins had 30 days from the will reading to contest the inheritance distribution. If they chose to do so, they would forfeit their $3 million and receive nothing. If they accepted their inheritances without contest, they would be legally barred from ever making future claims against Grandma's estate. They had no idea that by gleefully accepting their generous inheritances, they were signing away their rights to a fortune that would have made them among the wealthiest people in the state. The next few weeks were torture. I had to watch my family celebrate their good fortune while I pretended to struggle with my worthless inheritance. Jessica quit her job immediately and started planning an extended European vacation. Michael put a down payment on his dream lake house. Amy and Daniel both bought expensive cars and began talking about early retirement. But watching their celebration was nothing compared to enduring their continued mockery. Every family interaction became another opportunity for them to remind me of my place in the hierarchy. 3 days after the will reading, Jessica invited the whole family to dinner at an expensive steakhouse to celebrate Grandma's generosity. She made sure to seat me at the far end of the table, like an afterthought. When the waiter came to take orders, she loudly announced, Sarah probably can't afford much here, so maybe just get her a side salad. The table erupted in laughter. Michael raised his wine glass and said, to Grandma Eleanor, who knew exactly how to distribute her wealth fairly. Everyone toasted except me. I sat there, cutting my steak, which I had ordered despite Jessica's comment, and imagining their faces when they learned the truth. You know what, Sarah? Uncle Tom said, clearly emboldened by wine and his newfound wealth, you should really be thanking us. Thanking you for what? I asked quietly. For setting a good example all these years. If we hadn't been such successful, responsible family members, Grandma might not have known who deserved her money. He gestured grandly around the table. We showed her what real achievement looks like. Aunt Linda nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. Jessica's always been so put together, Michael's got that great job at the consulting firm, and my kids have always been honor students. Well, you've always been more of a cautionary tale. The cruelty was breathtaking, but I had to admire Grandma's psychological insight. She had predicted this exact behavior. In her journal, she'd written, give them money, and they'll use it as proof of their superiority. They'll see Sarah's smaller inheritance as validation of every cruel thought they've ever had about her. Michael leaned back in his chair, looking smugly satisfied. I hate to say it, Sarah, but maybe this inheritance situation is exactly what you needed. A reality check. You've always been kind of drifting through life without much direction. Maybe having less will motivate you to finally make something of yourself. Make something of myself? I repeated. Well, yeah. I mean, what have you actually accomplished? You work at that little nonprofit, you rent that tiny apartment, you drive that old Honda. Meanwhile, Jessica's been climbing the corporate ladder, I've got my consulting business, Amy's finishing her MBA, Daniel's got his law degree. We've all built something. What they didn't know was that I'd chosen the nonprofit work because I believed in the cause, not because I couldn't do anything else. I had a master's degree in social work from a prestigious university, funded entirely by scholarships and my own savings because I'd been too proud to ask family for help. My tiny apartment was actually a charming one-bedroom in a historic neighborhood that I'd chosen because I loved the character, not because I couldn't afford better. And my old Honda was a deliberate choice because I preferred to spend money on experiences and helping others rather than impressing people with material possessions. But they'd never bothered to learn any of that about me. Amy, emboldened by the family pile-on, decided to share her wisdom. Sarah, I think what everyone's trying to say is that this inheritance is actually a blessing in disguise. It's forcing you to confront some hard truths about yourself. Such as? I asked, genuinely curious to hear her analysis. Such as the fact that maybe you've been coasting through life, relying on being the sweet granddaughter to get by. Grandma always did baby you. But now that she's gone, you're going to have to stand on your own 2 feet. The irony was almost too much to bear. Here was Amy, who had borrowed money from Grandma Eleanor for her MBA tuition, telling me that I'd been the one coasting. Amy, who had moved back in with her parents after college and lived rent-free for 3 years while finding herself. Amy, whose car payments had been covered by Grandma's birthday gifts for the past 2 years. Daniel, not to be outdone by his sister, chimed in with his own pearl of wisdom. The thing is, Sarah, success recognizes success. Grandma could see that some of us had the drive and ambition to make good use of an inheritance, while others. He shrugged meaningfully. Others what, Daniel? I pressed. Others might just waste it on frivolous things or fail to invest it properly. I mean, no offense, but what would you have done with $3 million? Probably donated half of it to some animal shelter or something equally impractical. The table laughed again. Little did they know that I was already planning to donate more than their entire combined inheritances to carefully selected causes, but only after I'd secured my own financial future and built something sustainable. Dad, who had been unusually quiet during most of this character assassination, finally decided to contribute his thoughts. You know, kids, I think we're being too hard on Sarah. For a moment, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe my father would actually defend me for once. She may not have achieved what the rest of you have, but she's always been reliable, steady. Sometimes families need someone to fill the support role. My heart sank. Even his attempt at kindness was patronizing. What your father means, Aunt Linda added helpfully, is that every family needs someone to be the, how should I put this delicately? The baseline. You know, the person who makes everyone else's achievements look more impressive by comparison. I excused myself to the bathroom before I said something that would blow my cover. Standing in front of the mirror, I reminded myself that I only had to endure this for a few more weeks. Then they would learn exactly what their cruelty had cost them. When I returned to the table, they were deep in conversation about their spending plans. Jessica was showing photos of European hotels on her phone while Michael scrolled through lakefront properties. Amy and Daniel were debating whether to pay off their student loans immediately or invest the money for higher returns. What about you, Sarah? Jessica asked with mock sweetness. What are your big plans for your inheritance? Going to frame that rusty key? Maybe get a nice shadow box for it? More laughter. Always more laughter at my expense. I haven't decided yet, I said truthfully. Well, don't overthink it, Michael advised. It's not like you have a lot of options. Maybe you could sell it as scrap metal? Might get $5 or $10 for it. That night, I drove back to the storage unit. I needed to see the treasures again, to remind myself that their mockery was temporary but their loss would be permanent. As I walked through the climate-controlled space, examining paintings worth more than their houses, I found another section I hadn't fully explored during my first visit. Behind a curtain in the back corner were 3 more filing cabinets. These contained something even more valuable than art or stock certificates, documentation of my family's true financial history with Grandma Eleanor. She had kept meticulous records. Every loan, every gift, every bailout was documented with dates, amounts, and circumstances. The picture that emerged was stunning in its scope. Jessica hadn't just borrowed $50,000 for her wedding. Over the past 5 years, she'd received over $200,000 in various emergencies, car repairs, credit card debt, her security deposit and first 3 months' rent on her expensive apartment. None of it had been repaid. Michael's consulting business hadn't been self-funded as he claimed. Grandma had quietly provided over $300,000 in startup capital, equipment purchases, and operating expenses during his first 2 years. He'd never acknowledged this support publicly, always presenting himself as a self-made entrepreneur. Amy's MBA tuition, books, and living expenses had been covered by Grandma to the tune of $150,000. Daniel's law school? $200,000, plus an additional $50,000 for bar exam prep courses and his first apartment in the city. Uncle Tom had borrowed against his inheritance multiple times, receiving advances totaling nearly $400,000 over the past decade for various business ventures that had failed. Aunt Linda had been the recipient of countless birthday gifts and Christmas bonuses that were really disguised bailouts for her shopping addiction and poor financial decisions. Even Dad, the successful businessman, had quietly accepted over $500,000 in investment opportunities that were really just Grandma's way of helping him through some rough patches in his company. The total was staggering. Over the past 10 years, Grandma Eleanor had quietly given or loaned over $2 million to various family members. And me? I had never asked for a single penny. Not when I was struggling to pay for graduate school. Not when my car broke down and I had to take 3 buses to get to work for 2 months while I saved for repairs. Not when I had to choose between fixing my leaky roof or taking a vacation. I had always managed on my own, never wanting to burden Grandma or feel indebted to family members who already looked down on me. There was one more document that made everything clear, a letter Grandma had written to herself, dated just 6 months before her death. I've spent years trying to understand why Sarah never asks for help like the others do. At first, I worried that she was too proud or didn't trust me enough to share her struggles. But I've come to realize something beautiful. She doesn't ask because she doesn't need to lean on others to define her worth. She's the only one who loves me for who I am, not what I can provide. The others see me as a bank. Sarah sees me as a grandmother. The others visit when they need something. Sarah visits because she enjoys my company. When Jessica calls, it's usually followed by a request for money within 10 minutes. When Sarah calls, she wants to know how I'm feeling, what I'm reading, whether I need anything. I've decided that the inheritance will be a test of character. Those who have spent years taking from me will receive enough to satisfy their greed but not enough to match their entitlement. Sarah, who has never taken anything, will receive everything. It seems poetic, somehow. Reading this, I finally understood the full scope of Grandma's plan. This wasn't just about money, it was about revealing the truth about who we all really were. Meanwhile, I met quietly with Mr. Mitchell, who had been in on Grandma's plan from the beginning. Your grandmother was very specific about the timeline, he explained during one of our secret meetings. She wanted to give them enough rope to hang themselves, so to speak. They have to make their choice without knowing what they're giving up. What if they find out somehow? I asked. Mr. Mitchell shook his head. The storage unit is under a corporate name your grandmother established years ago. The tax records are sealed. Unless they hire a very expensive team of investigators, which they won't, because they think they already know everything, there's no way for them to discover the truth before the deadline. On day 28, Jessica cornered me at a family barbecue at Uncle Tom's house. You know, Sarah, she said, sipping her champagne, I almost feel bad about how things worked out with the will. Almost? I asked. Well, I mean, you got what you deserved, but still. Family is family. She paused dramatically. Tell you what, if you want to sell me that old key, I'll give you $1,000 for it. As a keepsake, you know? It would mean a lot to have something that belonged to Grandma. I nearly choked on my drink. $1,000 for a key that unlocked a $100 million fortune. That's very generous, Jessica, but I think I'll keep it. She shrugged. Suit yourself. Though I can't imagine what you'd want with a piece of junk like that. During those weeks of waiting, the family dynamics became even more toxic. Success, or what they perceived as success, had made them bold in their cruelty. Jessica started hosting family investment meetings at her apartment, where she'd serve expensive wine and discuss portfolio strategies. I was invited, presumably so they could continue their entertainment at my expense. Sarah, you should really sit in on these discussions, Jessica said during one such gathering. I mean, you'll never have real money to invest, but it's good to learn how wealthy people think. Wealthy people? I asked. Jessica, you just got this money 2 weeks ago. She waved her hand dismissively. Wealth is a mindset, Sarah. Some people are born with it, others aren't. Grandma clearly recognized that some of us have a wealthy mindset and others. She gestured at me meaningfully. Amy nodded enthusiastically. It's so true. I've already been reading about investment strategies and tax shelters. Did you know that with proper planning, we can make this money last for generations? What they didn't realize was that they were approaching their inheritance with the exact same entitled, short-sighted thinking that had driven them to constantly borrow from Grandma in the first place. They saw $3 million as infinite money because they'd never learned to manage smaller amounts responsibly. Michael had already spent $60,000 on his lake house down payment and another $40,000 on a boat. You have to spend money to make money, he explained to the group. This lake house will be a great investment property when I'm not using it. Have you researched the rental market in that area? I asked innocently. He looked annoyed at the question. Sarah, I don't expect you to understand real estate investment strategies. This is the kind of thinking that separates people like us from people like you. But I had researched that area, out of curiosity. The lake house market was oversaturated, the rental season was only 4 months long, and properties like his typically sat empty most of the year while generating massive maintenance costs. He was walking into a financial sinkhole, but his newfound wealth had made him too arrogant to do proper due diligence. During one particularly painful family dinner, Uncle Tom decided to share his philosophy on inheritance and family dynamics. You know what I think the problem is with society today? He announced, clearly a few drinks in. We've lost the concept of natural hierarchy. Grandma understood that. She knew who the leaders were in this family and who the followers were. Natural hierarchy? I repeated. Some people are born to lead, to build, to achieve great things. Others are born to, well, to support the achievers. There's no shame in it, Sarah. Someone has to be the worker bees while others are the queens. Aunt Linda raised her glass in agreement. Exactly. And Eleanor was wise enough to see that and distribute her wealth accordingly. Can you imagine if she had split everything equally? What a waste that would have been. The conversation continued in this vein for over an hour. They had convinced themselves that their inheritance wasn't just luck or family connection, but proof of their inherent superiority. They spoke about deserving their money, about being chosen by Grandma, about their natural leadership qualities. I sat there, taking mental notes on every cruel word, every dismissive gesture, every moment of entitled arrogance. I was building a catalog of their behavior that I could refer to later when guilt tried to creep in. Because part of me, the part that had spent years trying to be the peacemaker, trying to earn their acceptance, occasionally wondered if I was being too harsh. Maybe they didn't really mean the things they were saying. Maybe it was just the excitement of sudden wealth making them act out of character. But then Daniel would make a comment like, Sarah, I hope you don't take this the wrong way, but I think Grandma's will might be the best thing that ever happened to you. You've been coasting on being the niece-granddaughter for too long. Now you'll have to develop some actual skills. Or Jessica would say something like, I was thinking, Sarah, with your new financial situation, you might want to consider moving somewhere cheaper. I mean, why struggle to afford rent in this city when you could probably buy a little house outright in some small town? It might be more appropriate. These weren't momentary lapses in judgment. This was who they really were when they thought they held all the power. The most revealing moment came 3 weeks after the will reading. Jessica had organized a family photo session to commemorate what she called the new chapter in our family story. She hired a professional photographer and rented an upscale venue. When I arrived, I immediately noticed the seating arrangement she had planned. The 4 inheritors, Jessica, Michael, Amy, and Daniel, were positioned in elegant chairs in the front row. Dad, Uncle Tom, and Aunt Linda were standing behind them in positions of proud parents and aunt. And me? I was literally positioned off to the side, standing alone, like someone who had wandered into the wrong family photo. Perfect, Jessica said, clapping her hands. This really captures the family dynamic, don't you think? The photographer, clearly uncomfortable with the obvious symbolism, diplomatically suggested some alternative arrangements. Maybe we could do a few with everyone more integrated? Oh no, Jessica said quickly. This is exactly how we want it. It tells the real story of our family. As the photographer snapped away, I realized that this photo would someday serve as perfect evidence of their character. Years from now, when they claimed they had always treated me fairly, when they rewrote history to paint themselves as victims, I would have this photograph to remind them of exactly who they chose to be. After the photo session, we went to dinner at yet another expensive restaurant. The conversation had moved on to their plans for giving back now that they were wealthy. I'm thinking of starting a scholarship fund, Amy announced. For deserving students who show real academic promise. That's wonderful. Aunt Linda gushed. What kind of students? You know, the kind who really apply themselves. Students who demonstrate excellence and leadership potential. Not just anyone, we want to make sure the money goes to people who will actually make something of themselves. The irony was breathtaking. Amy, whose entire education had been funded by Grandma Eleanor's generosity, was now planning to judge other students' worthiness based on criteria she herself had never met until she inherited money. Michael was planning to donate to business development programs. I want to help other entrepreneurs get started, he explained magnanimously. People who have great ideas but need capital to make them reality. He had conveniently forgotten that his own great idea had been funded entirely by Grandma's quiet support. Even their charity was tainted with superiority and judgment. The 30-day deadline passed on a Tuesday. I spent the morning at the courthouse with Mr. Mitchell, filing the final paperwork that would make the inheritance distribution permanent and legally binding. Congratulations, Sarah, Mr. Mitchell said as we walked down the courthouse steps. You are now one of the wealthiest women in the city. That afternoon, I called a family meeting. They gathered at Dad's house, probably expecting me to beg for financial help or maybe announce that I was moving away now that I'd been so thoroughly humiliated. Jessica had even brought champagne, as if my continued suffering was worth celebrating. I wanted to thank you all, I began, standing in Dad's living room while they lounged comfortably on furniture that would soon seem very modest compared to what I could now afford. Thank us? Michael asked. For what? For showing me exactly who you really are. And for making your choices so clearly. I pulled out a folder of documents and set it on the coffee table. You see, Grandma's will wasn't as simple as Mr. Mitchell made it seem that day. Dad leaned forward. What are you talking about? The key you all found so amusing? It opens a storage unit. Storage Unit 247 at Riverside Storage Facility, to be exact. Jessica rolled her eyes. Let me guess, it's full of Grandma's old jewelry or something? Sarah, if you think we're going to renegotiate the will over some sentimental trinkets, it's not jewelry, Jessica. It's a Van Gogh. And a Picasso. And a Monet. Along with about $50 million worth of other artwork. The room went quiet. But that's not all, I continued, enjoying the stunned expressions on their faces. There are also stock portfolios worth $30 million, property deeds worth another $20 million, and various other investments. Michael stood up abruptly. That's impossible. We would have known. Would you? When's the last time any of you actually spent time with Grandma? I mean really spent time, not just showing up when you needed money. Amy's face had gone pale. You're lying. Am I? I pulled out my phone and showed them photos I'd taken in the storage unit. Here's the Van Gogh. Here's the property deed to the Riverside Commercial Complex, you know, that building downtown where Jessica's favorite boutique is? Grandma owned the whole thing. The silence stretched on for a full minute before Uncle Tom exploded. This is fraud. You somehow tricked her into changing the will. We'll contest this. I smiled. Actually, you can't. By accepting your inheritances, you agreed to the terms as stated. You had 30 days to contest, and that deadline passed yesterday. It's all legally binding now. I pulled out another document. This is from the trust Grandma established. It states very clearly that anyone who accepts the initial inheritance distribution forfeits any claim to additional assets. You all signed the acceptance papers. You all deposited the checks. You're bound by the terms. Jessica was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. But that's over $100 million. Actually, it's closer to $115 million, according to the most recent appraisals. But who's counting? Dad slumped into his chair. Eleanor. She planned this. Oh, she absolutely planned this. She spent years watching you all treat me like garbage while treating her like a walking ATM. She saw Jessica borrow money and never pay it back. She noticed that Michael only called when he needed something. She watched the rest of you calculate inheritance shares at family dinners. I walked over to where Jessica was sitting and looked down at her. Remember when you burned that photo of Grandma and me? You said the worthless grandchild gets worthless junk. Well, congratulations, Jessica. You just traded $100 million inheritance for the satisfaction of being cruel to me one more time. Aunt Linda stood up shakily. Sarah, surely we can work something out. Families should stick together. Now you want to stick together? Where was that family loyalty when you called me family trash? Where was it when you all spent years making me feel worthless? Daniel, who had been quiet until now, suddenly spoke up. Wait. Sarah, you don't understand. We were upset about the funeral. We didn't mean it. Daniel, you called me a rusty person. You all meant every word. I gathered up my documents and headed for the door. The beautiful thing about Grandma's plan is that she gave you exactly what you deserved. She knew your true character, and she knew that given the choice between treating me with kindness and securing your financial future, you'd choose cruelty every time. Sarah, wait. Jessica called out desperately. We can share it. All of us. It doesn't have to be this way. I turned back to face them one last time. You're right, Jessica. It didn't have to be this way. If you had shown even a shred of decency, if any of you had treated me like family instead of like something you scraped off your shoe, Grandma might have made different arrangements. But instead, you chose to humiliate me at her funeral. You chose to mock her final gift to me. You chose to burn my memories and laugh at my pain. So now you get to live with those choices. Michael was starting to panic. There has to be something we can do. Some way to reverse this. There is absolutely nothing you can do. The law is very clear, and you all made your choices with full legal capacity. You wanted to celebrate getting your $3 million? Congratulations. Enjoy every penny. As I reached the door, I heard Jessica start to cry. Not the fake tears she'd shed at the funeral, but real, desperate sobs. Sarah, please. I'm your sister. I paused with my hand on the doorknob. No, Jessica. A sister wouldn't have burned my photographs. A sister wouldn't have called me worthless. A sister wouldn't have spent years making me feel like I didn't belong in my own family. You had a choice that day. You could have shown me kindness in my grief. You could have defended me when the others attacked. You could have been the sister I always hoped you might become. Instead, you chose cruelty. You chose mockery. You chose to kick me when I was down. Now you get to live with that choice for the rest of your life, knowing that your need to hurt me cost you more money than you'll ever see again. I walked out and closed the door behind me, leaving them to contemplate their new reality. The aftermath was exactly what you'd expect. They tried everything, hiring lawyers, private investigators, even attempting to have me declared mentally incompetent. But Grandma had been thorough in her planning. Every legal avenue had been anticipated and blocked. Jessica's European vacation was cancelled when she realized $3 million wasn't as much as she'd thought after taxes. Michael's lake house went into foreclosure when he discovered he couldn't afford the upkeep. Amy and Daniel both had to return their expensive cars when they realized they needed to invest their money more carefully to make it last. Meanwhile, I hired my own team of lawyers and financial advisors to help me manage my inheritance responsibly. I established a charitable foundation in Grandma Eleanor's name, focusing on helping children who, like me, felt overlooked and undervalued by their families. 6 months after the will reading, I bought a beautiful house on the hill overlooking the city, not far from where Grandma used to live. It has a view of the commercial district where I now own 6 buildings, and a garden where I grow the same flowers Grandma taught me to love. I don't speak to my family anymore. They've tried reaching out, of course, especially around holidays when guilt tends to run high. But I've learned that some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. Some words, once spoken, can't be taken back. Some choices, once made, define who you really are. The rusty key sits on my mantle now, polished until it gleams. It's become a symbol to me, not of what I was given, but of what I learned. Sometimes the most valuable gifts come in the plainest packages. Sometimes the people who love us most see potential that others miss. And sometimes, the greatest revenge is simply allowing people to face the consequences of their own choices. Grandma Eleanor knew that money doesn't change character, it reveals it. She knew that given enough rope, my family would hang themselves with their own greed and cruelty. She knew that the key to my future wasn't just made of metal, but of the love and wisdom she'd spent years sharing with me. Every morning when I see that key, I'm reminded that I am not the worthless grandchild they said I was. I am Eleanor's granddaughter, heir to her wisdom, her strength, and her incredible ability to see the long game. And they? They're exactly who they always were, just with a little less money to hide behind. The key wasn't rusty at all, it turns out. It just needed someone who understood its value to make it shine.